90 minutes before my mother's funeral, I stood at a departure gate and watched my own husband hand my seat to another woman. If this story hits you the way it hit me, do me a favor right now and hit like and subscribe, because what happened next at that gate changed 4 lives forever, and I want you here for every second of it. My name is Renee Calloway. I'm 38 years old, and for 11 years I let the people closest to me believe I was nothing more than a quiet woman who worked from a laptop at her kitchen table in Tulsa, Oklahoma, paying bills nobody ever saw and asking for nothing in return. That was the story I let them believe, and for a long time, I thought it was a kindness. I know now it was a mistake, the kind that costs you almost everything before you understand what you built and why you built it. I need to take you back before the airport, before the gate, before the moment my husband looked me in the eye and told me the dead don't need punctuality. I need to take you back to a woman named Renee Calloway Sims, who was my mother and who spent 31 years cleaning offices at night in a town called Henrietta, Oklahoma, so that her only daughter could have shoes that fit and a lunch that wasn't embarrassing. Loretta never made it past a GED. She never owned a car that didn't need a jump start twice a week. But she had this way of looking at the sky, whenever a plane passed overhead, like it was a small miracle, like the world had promised her something once, and this was the proof it kept its word. She used to grab my hand on the porch and point up and say, "Renee, baby, somebody's going somewhere. Somebody's chasing something." I didn't understand until years later that she wasn't talking about the plane. She was talking about me. I built my company in silence, and I want to explain why, because it matters to everything that happened at that gate. When I was 26, working 3 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night, I started a small logistics brokerage out of a spare bedroom, matching cargo shippers with regional carriers who had empty space nobody was using efficiently. It was unglamorous work. Spreadsheets, phone calls, contracts nobody wanted to read. But I had a gift for finding inefficiency and turning it into money, and within 6 years that spare bedroom brokerage had become Meridian Sky Holdings, a private aviation and logistics company that today controls 41 regional cargo and charter routes across the central United States, along with a 51% stake in a passenger carrier called Prairie Wing Airlines. My name sits on none of the public paperwork. Everything runs through a family trust set up by a tax attorney named Harold Weiss, a careful, quiet man who understood, without me ever fully explaining it, that I needed to be invisible while I built this. Meridian Sky is worth, as of the last valuation 8 months ago, $1.8 billion. My husband did not know that number. My husband did not know most numbers. My husband believed I did freelance bookkeeping for small businesses, 3 or 4 clients a month, enough to justify the long hours and the closed office door, not enough to raise a single question. His name was Derek Sims, and I married him 9 years ago in a courthouse in Muskogee with nobody in attendance but my mother and his brother Kyle. Derek was charming in the specific way that con men and salesmen are charming, which is to say he made you feel like the only interesting person in a room, right up until the moment you realized he'd made everyone in the room feel exactly the same way. When we met, he sold commercial insurance policies to small trucking companies, and he was good at it. Good enough that for the first 4 years of marriage I genuinely believed we were partners building something modest and honest together. I let him believe the same modest story about me. I told myself I was protecting the business, protecting the years of work it took to build something real, from a man who might change the moment he understood what I was actually worth. I told myself that was wisdom. Looking back, I think some part of me already suspected the truth about him and simply wasn't ready to face it. Keeping the secret let me postpone finding out. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It happened in small, deniable pieces over about 18 months. Derek's insurance sales dried up after a merger cost him his biggest accounts, and instead of rebuilding, he started spending more time at a golf club 2 towns over that he had no business being able to afford. That's where he met Vanessa Cho. Vanessa ran a boutique event staging company, the kind that does step-and-repeat backdrops and champagne towers for people who want their birthday parties photographed like movie premieres. She drove a leased Mercedes she couldn't actually afford either, which I only discovered later, and she had a laugh that carried across a room, engineered, I think, specifically to carry across a room. Derek started mentioning her the way people mention someone they're trying to convince themselves they're not thinking about too much. Vanessa says the golf club is doing a charity gala. Vanessa thinks I'd be great running staging logistics for her company. Vanessa says I have an eye for presentation. I noticed. I always notice. It's the same instinct that built Meridian Sky, the ability to see a pattern before it fully forms. But I told myself, the same way I'd told myself about the secrecy, that trusting him meant not chasing every uncomfortable thread. I gave him room. I gave him the benefit of every doubt I had left in me, and I kept working, kept building, kept saying nothing, because that had always been my answer. To everything hard. Work harder, say less, wait it out. My mother's stroke happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March, at her small house in Henrietta, while she was watering the tomato plants she grew every year on the same patch of dirt behind her carport. A neighbor found her an hour later. The hospital called me at 3:17 in the afternoon, and I remember the exact number on the clock because I have looked at it in my mind 1,000 times since, wondering what would have happened if I'd called her that morning instead of sending a text I never got a reply to. She held on for 6 days in the ICU in Tulsa, and I sat beside that bed every one of those 6 days, holding a hand that used to point at airplanes, listening to machines breathe for her, until on the 6th night, just past midnight, she was gone. I was 41 years old the day my mother pointed at that sky for the last time when I was a child, and I was 38 years old the day she stopped breathing in a hospital bed. And in between those two moments I had built an empire and told almost no one, and I would have given every dollar of it back, every route, every aircraft, every zero on that valuation, for one more Tuesday afternoon on that porch. The funeral was set for a Saturday morning at Mount Calvary Baptist Church in Henrietta, the same small white church where my mother had sung in the choir for 26 years, where half the congregation had known me since I was a girl in pigtails sitting in the third pew. I booked the last commercial flight out of Tulsa the evening before, a short hop on Prairie Wing that would get me to a small regional airport 40 minutes from Henrietta, close enough to make it in plenty of time. I did not pull rank. I did not call the airline's operations desk and requisition a seat the way I technically could have with one phone call. That felt wrong to me in a way I never had to think twice about. I wanted, that night of all nights, to be an ordinary daughter flying home to bury her mother, not the invisible owner of anything. I packed a black dress, my mother's funeral program that the church had emailed me a proof of, and a small tin of her tomato seeds that I intended to plant somewhere, anywhere, once this was over. Derek said he would meet me at the gate. He'd taken an earlier car service from a business meeting, he said, something about staging logistics for a corporate retreat. I believed him, because by then believing him had become a habit I hadn't gotten around to breaking. I arrived at Tulsa International 2 hours early, the way I always do, the way my mother taught me. Get there early, baby, so nobody can rush you out of what's yours. I checked in at a self-service kiosk, and the screen returned an error. Reservation not found. I assumed it was a system glitch, the kind that happens on any airline on any given day, and I walked to the counter to sort it out in person, my heels clicking too loud in the quiet of an evening terminal, the tin of tomato seeds pressed against my palm inside my coat pocket like a small stone I needed to hold on to. That is when I saw them. Derek was standing near gate C14, dressed not for a funeral but for something else entirely, a navy blazer I didn't recognize, and beside him stood Vanessa Cho, holding a boarding pass in one manicured hand and a garment bag in the other, dressed like she was headed somewhere with a red carpet at the end of it. Derek's brother Kyle was there too, phone half raised the way people hold phones now, always ready to record, never quite committing until something happens worth recording. And it was happening. I walked up slowly, and Derek's face did something complicated when he saw me, guilt trying to disguise itself as surprise. "Renee," he said. "Baby, listen, there's been a mix-up with the booking system. I was going to call you." "What kind of mix-up?" I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Vanessa answered before he could. "The airline consolidated some reservations for the corporate account," she said, breezy, like she was explaining a scheduling app to a child. "Derek's coming with me to Vegas for the staging conference. It's a huge opportunity for him. I upgraded us both to first class since it's such short notice. I used some travel credit that was sitting on your joint account. I hope that's all right. We can sort out reimbursement later." I looked at Derek. "You used our account to fly to Vegas with her tonight." "It's one weekend, Renee," Derek said, and there was an edge in his voice now, defensive, the tone of a man who has already decided he is the one being wronged. Your mom's funeral isn't until tomorrow morning. I'll be back Monday. I already told the family I had a work thing. You told them what? Kyle lowered his phone half an inch, at least having the decency to look uncomfortable. Vanessa did not have that decency. Vanessa looked at her watch, the universal gesture of a woman who has decided this conversation has already run past its usefulness to her. I checked the manifest, Vanessa said, almost bored. Your flight's actually oversold tonight. Full plane. So even if there was a mix-up, there's nothing to fix. I'm sure your mother would understand a delay. The dead don't exactly check attendance. I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, the way I had to sit with it standing in that terminal with a tin of tomato seeds in my pocket and my mother not yet 12 hours in the ground of a funeral home in Henrietta. I have replayed a lot of terrible sentences in my life, but that one, said by a stranger about my mother with a manicure and a garment bag, is the one that finally, after 18 months of choosing not to see, made everything come into focus at once, sharp and cold and undeniable. If you were standing in that terminal in my shoes right now, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments, because I want to. No, before I tell you what I actually did. What I did was reach into my coat pocket, past the tin of tomato seeds, and take out my phone. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry, not yet, though it was close, right there behind my eyes, pressing. I walked past Derek and Vanessa to the nearest gate agent's counter, where a young man with a name tag that read Marcus Odell was watching the whole exchange with the practiced stillness of someone trained to stay calm around explosive passengers. I set my ID on the counter and asked him, quietly, whether he had access to the airline's ownership verification system, the internal portal that confirms operational authority for Prairie Wing's controlling entity. Marcus blinked. Ma'am, that's a corporate-level system. That's not something we... I understand, I said. I'm going to give you an authorization code, and I need you to call your shift supervisor and read it to them exactly as I say it. I gave him the code. Every controlling officer at Meridian Sky carries one, an alphanumeric string tied directly to the trust structure, something Harold Weiss insisted on years ago, in case exactly a moment like this one ever became necessary, though neither of us had ever imagined it would look like this. Marcus typed it into a terminal I couldn't see, his eyebrows rising slowly, and then he picked up the desk phone and made a call I could only half hear, words like authorization tier and principal confirmation, and then, after a pause, I need to verify this immediately. This doesn't look like a system error. Derek had drifted closer, sensing something was wrong, but not yet understanding what. Renee, what are you doing? Just take the next flight. This doesn't need to be dramatic. There is no next flight tonight, Derek, I said. You made sure of that. Vanessa laughed, short and disbelieving. Sweetie, you're not going to intimidate an airline employee into bumping paying customers because you're upset. That's not how any of this works. Marcus hung up the phone. His entire posture had changed, the loose, tired stance of a late shift gate agent replaced by something rigid and alert. He looked at me and then at his screen and then at me again like he was trying to reconcile two facts that didn't belong in the same body. Ma'am, he said, I need you to wait here. I've called my supervisor and the station manager is coming down personally. Why? Derek said, laughing now too, nervous laughter, the kind people do when they can feel the ground shifting but can't name why yet. What's going on? Why is a manager coming for a canceled reservation? Marcus didn't answer him. Marcus looked only at me, and something in his expression had gone from confusion to a kind of careful, uncertain respect, the look of a man realizing he is standing closer to something important than he understood 30 seconds ago. Kyle had stopped filming entirely now, phone lowered all the way, watching his brother with a frown starting to form. Vanessa checked her watch again, but slower this time, less bored, more like she was suddenly aware of time in a different way, aware that whatever was happening had stopped being background noise to her evening and had become the main event. The station manager arrived 4 minutes later. Her name was Priscilla Ortiz, and she moved fast, the way people move when they've been told something on the phone that made them drop whatever they were doing. She had a tablet in her hand, and she was scanning it as she walked, and when she reached the counter she looked up at me and said, without a hint of doubt in her voice, Miss Calloway, I'm so sorry for the confusion tonight. I understand there was a booking issue and I understand about your mother, and I want you to know we will make this right immediately, whatever you need. The way she said my full name, Miss Calloway, not Mrs. Sims, not the name on my ID, but Calloway, the name on the trust documents, the name that meant something entirely different inside that internal system than it meant to Derek or to Vanessa, or even, honestly, to most of my own family, landed in that terminal like a small detonation. Derek's face changed first. Not confusion this time. Something closer to dawning, dreadful comprehension. Renee, he said slowly. Calloway. Why did she call you Calloway? I turned to face him fully for the first time since I'd walked up to that gate. Because that's my name on the paperwork that actually matters, Derek. I own 51% of this airline. I've owned it for 6 years. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever stood inside. Vanessa's garment bag slid an inch down her arm, and she caught it without seeming to notice she'd almost dropped it. Cal said something under his breath that might have been a curse word or might have been my name. I honestly couldn't tell you which. And Derek looked like a man watching a building he lived inside collapse in slow motion around him. Still standing, not yet buried, but understanding with total clarity that the walls were coming down. That's not possible, he said. You do bookkeeping. You do freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. I let you believe that, I said. For 9 years, I let everyone believe that, because I built this before I met you, and I was terrified of what would change in you the moment you knew the real number. I think some part of me always knew I was right to be terrified. I just didn't want to be right yet. Priscilla Ortiz, to her enormous credit, did not wait for the family drama to resolve itself before doing her job. She turned to me and said quietly that the passenger flight was indeed sold out, that a systems review confirmed my reservation had been improperly canceled, and the credit reallocated without authorization roughly 90 minutes earlier, and that she was prepared to do whatever necessary to get me to my mother's funeral. I told her I did not want a single other passenger removed from that aircraft. I have never once in 6 years of ownership used Meridian Sky's authority to inconvenience an ordinary traveler for my own convenience, and I was not going to start that night, grieving or not. I asked instead whether there was a charter option, something small, something that could get me into the regional airport near Henrietta before 10 o'clock the next morning. Priscilla made 2 calls. The first confirmed that a light twin-engine charter, one of 11 small aircraft Meridian Sky, kept on standby for exactly this kind of urgent regional need, could be readied within the hour at a private aviation terminal 14 minutes from where we stood. The second call was to a woman named Denise Whitfield, one of my most senior pilots, a steady, no-nonsense flyer who had been with the company for 9 years and had never once, in my memory, said no to a difficult assignment. Denise picked up on the second ring, and when told the situation, she didn't hesitate. Tell her I'll have wheels up in 50 minutes, she said. Tell her I'm sorry about her mother. While all of that was happening around me, moving fast and quiet and efficient the way things move when the machine you built finally, for the first time, works for you instead of around you. Derek was still standing there, and Vanessa was still standing there, and the two of them had gone very still in a way that felt less like grief for what they'd done and more like fast, frantic recalculation for what they'd lost. Renee, Derek said, stepping toward me, and his voice had changed completely now, all the earlier irritation gone, replaced by something desperate and pleading. Baby, listen, I didn't know, obviously I didn't know. If I'd known any of this I never would have. You never would have what? I said. Canceled my flight to my mother's funeral? Or you never would have gotten caught doing it? He didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that didn't make things worse for him, and some small, still functioning part of him seemed to understand that. Vanessa recovered faster than he did, because Vanessa, I would learn over the following weeks, always recovers fast. It's practically her only consistent trait. She smoothed the front of her blazer and said, with an attempt at composure that didn't quite land, well, this is obviously a family matter, and I don't want to intrude. Derek, I'll take an earlier car back. We can reschedule the conference for another time. No, I said, and something in my voice made both of them go quiet. You're not going anywhere yet. Not until I understand exactly what I'm looking at. I asked Priscilla for something specific, a request that surprised even me with how calm it came out, given that inside I was shaking. I asked whether the airline's booking system kept a log, a full time-stamped record of who accessed a reservation, what changes were made, and when. Every airline does, for fraud and security purposes, and Priscilla confirmed it within minutes, printing 4 pages at the counter and handing them to me without a word, her face carefully neutral, the face of someone who has seen enough of these moments to know not to react to what's on the page in front of a crowd. I read it standing right there at the gate, with Derek and Vanessa and Kyle all watching me read it, none of them saying a word. The log showed that the reservation under my name had first been accessed 48 hours before the flight, not that evening, 48 hours earlier, from a device registered to Derek's phone. It showed 3 separate logins over those 2 days, each one checking seat availability, checking upgrade costs, checking cancellation penalties. It showed the actual cancellation had occurred at 6:40 that evening, exactly 3 hours after I had texted Derek the final confirmed time of my mother's funeral. And it showed that immediately, following the cancellation, a travel credit of just over $1,100 had been applied to a first-class upgrade under the name Vanessa Cho. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mix-up discovered too late to fix. This was a plan, built and executed across 2 full days, with my dead mother's funeral used as the exact financial and logistical trigger point to fund another woman's upgrade to first class. I looked up from those 4 pages and looked at my husband of 9 years, and I felt something inside me go very quiet and very final, the way a door sounds when it's closed gently instead of slammed, which somehow is so much worse. 2 days, I said. You planned this for 2 days. Derek opened his mouth and then closed it again, because there was genuinely nothing left to say that the paper in my hand hadn't already said more honestly than he ever would. The charter was ready 30 minutes later. I want to tell you that I stormed off toward it with my head high and my heels clicking with righteous fury, but that's not what happened, because grief doesn't care about your dignity. It just waits for the first quiet moment to knock you flat. And it found me in the private aviation lounge while I waited for boarding. I sat down in a corner chair, alone, the tin of tomato seeds still in my pocket, and I took out my phone and I did something I had been avoiding for 4 days, ever since the hospital called with the final news. I opened a voicemail my mother had left me 9 days before her stroke, one I'd seen and never played, because some part of me, the same part that never quite trusted good things to stay good, was afraid of what it would feel like to hear her voice knowing I hadn't called her back in time. Her voice came through soft and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had never once in her life demanded anything from anybody. Hey baby, it's just your mama. Nothing urgent. I just wanted to hear your voice. It's been a minute. Tomatoes are coming. And good this year. I think it's because of that manure Mr. Pruitt gave me. Don't laugh. I love you. Call me when you get a chance. No rush. No rush. She said no rush, because she'd spent 71 years learning not to ask for too much, not even from her own daughter. And I sat in that lounge and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry since the hospital, quiet and shaking, holding a phone with a voice on it that would never say another new sentence to me again. Denise Whitfield found me there 15 minutes later and didn't say anything about my face, just told me the aircraft was fueled and ready whenever I was. I boarded with nothing but a small bag, the funeral program, and the tomato seeds. The flight took just under an hour, cutting through a clear night sky, and I spent most of it looking down at the small scattered lights of towns I couldn't name, thinking about a porch in Henrietta and a woman pointing up at planes and telling a little girl that somebody, somewhere, was chasing something. We landed at a small regional strip 40 minutes outside Henrietta a little after 11 that night. A car Meridian Sky kept on standby for exactly this kind of contingency was waiting, and I was at my aunt's house, where I'd be staying, by midnight. I did not sleep. I sat at my aunt's kitchen table until the sky started to lighten, holding the tin of tomato seeds, thinking about everything I hadn't seen and everything I'd chosen not to see. And somewhere around 5 in the morning, I finally understood the shape of what I needed to do. Not just about the funeral, not just about Derek, but about the entire architecture of secrecy I'd built my life on top of for 11 years. The funeral was everything my mother deserved. Mount Calvary was full, standing room only. The choir she'd sung with for 26 years opening with a hymn that had every person in that church, myself included, crying before the pastor even reached the pulpit. I sat in the front pew, and I did not think about Derek once during that service. Not once. because that hour belonged entirely to Renee Calloway Sims and nobody else, and I am proud, looking back, that I managed to give her that. Derek did not come to Oklahoma. I want to be honest with you about that, because it matters. He texted twice, asking if he could still make it, if there was any flight he could catch, and I did not answer either message, because by then I understood that his presence at that funeral would have been for him, a chance to smooth things over in front of family, not for my mother, who he had, in the end, treated as an inconvenient scheduling conflict standing between him and a weekend in Las Vegas with another woman. What would you have done in my place? Would you have let him come? I'll tell you what I actually decided, but I want you thinking about your own answer first. I stayed in Henrietta for 4 days after the funeral, longer than planned, helping my aunt sort through my mother's small house, finding, among other things, a shoebox in the back of her closet filled with every card I'd ever sent her, going back to elementary school, kept in order by date, a physical record of a woman who had saved every scrap of proof that her daughter loved her. I planted the tomato seeds behind my aunt's carport on the last morning, in a small patch of dirt that got good afternoon sun, and I told myself, standing there with dirt under my fingernails, that whatever came next with Derek, I was done being invisible in every part of my life, not just the parts that were convenient to keep hidden. When I flew back to Tulsa, Derek was waiting at the house, and the conversation that followed was long and ugly and, in its own way, clarifying. He apologized, extensively, the kind of apology that circles back on itself, that keeps finding new angles to approach the same core defense, that he hadn't known who I really was, that if he'd known the truth he never would have risked it, that the concealment itself was a kind of betrayal that had, in his telling, made his own betrayal somehow more understandable, if not forgivable. I let him say all of it. I didn't interrupt, because I wanted to hear the full shape of what he actually believed, and what he believed, stripped down to its core, was that my worth to him had been a fixed, calculable number, and that number had simply turned out to be much larger than he'd priced in, and he was furious, underneath the apology, that I hadn't told him the real number sooner, so he could have behaved accordingly. "You're angry," I said, "not because of what you did. You're angry because you didn't know what you were risking when you did it." He didn't deny it. To his credit, or maybe just his exhaustion, he didn't deny it. I told him then what I had decided in my aunt's kitchen at 5 in the morning with a tin of tomato seeds in my hand. I told him I had spent 11 years managing a company worth more than most people can imagine, and I had spent 9 of those years married to a man who thought I balanced small business books for a living, and both of those facts were true at the same time, and both of them, I finally understood, were failures of the same kind, a failure to trust anyone, including myself, with the whole truth of what I was building and who I was becoming while I built it. I told him I was filing for divorce, and that unlike the flight log at the gate, this decision had not taken 2 days of planning. It had taken about 4 minutes at that gate counter, and everything since had just been the confirmation. Derek tried, for a few weeks after, to fight it, alternating between anger and pleading, at one point suggesting through his lawyer that the marriage entitled him to some claim on Meridian Sky, given the years he'd, in his words, supported my career from the background. My legal team, headed by the same careful, quiet Harold Weiss who'd set up the trust 6 years earlier, made short work of that claim, given the prenuptial agreement Derek himself had signed 9 years earlier, back when he believed he was marrying a modest bookkeeper and had, ironically, insisted on that agreement himself to protect his own comparatively modest insurance sales income. The irony was not lost on either of us, and I take no particular pleasure in it, but I won't pretend it didn't feel like something settling into its correct place after a long time out of alignment. Vanessa Cho, for what it's worth, did not last long in the story either. Kyle told me, months later, over a lunch we started having occasionally, that Vanessa had quietly stopped returning Derek's calls within about 3 weeks of the airport incident. Once it became clear that the man she'd upgraded to first class had no billion-dollar wife left to potentially benefit from, and no obvious path back to the lifestyle she'd been angling toward. Kyle, to his credit, had deleted the video he'd started filming at the gate before it ever left his phone, and he apologized to me directly, more than once, in a way that felt genuine rather than performative, and I appreciated that more than I let on at the time. The story still got out, though, not through Kyle, but through Vanessa herself, strangely enough, in a moment of what I can only assume was spite after things fell apart between her and Derek. She posted a vague, self-serving account on social media about a controlling, secretive billionaire wife who had humiliated her at an airport, clearly hoping to frame herself as the wrong party. It backfired almost immediately, because within a day, someone, I still don't know who, possibly Marcus Odell, possibly someone else who'd been standing near that gate, posted the actual flight log. The 4 pages Priscilla Ortiz had printed for me that night, and the internet, which has very little patience for nuance but a great deal of patience for a clean villain, decided quickly and permanently who the villain of that story was. It was not me. I want to tell you something honest here, something I don't think gets said enough in stories like this. I did not feel triumphant when that happened. I felt tired. I felt like a woman who had spent 4 days planting tomato seeds and burying her mother and ending a marriage, and who now had to watch strangers on the internet turn the worst week of her life into a piece of entertainment with a satisfying ending. There was no triumph in it for me. There was just relief, quiet and exhausted, that the truth, once it was finally out in the open, in every part of my life, was simpler to carry than the secret had ever been. 6 months after the funeral, I did something my mother would have understood better than anyone else alive. I used part of Meridian Sky's charitable arm, which until then had mostly funded small scholarships and equipment grants for regional aviation schools, to establish something new, a fund I called the Loretta Fund, after her, designed to cover emergency last-minute travel costs for people trying to reach a dying parent or attend a funeral they couldn't otherwise afford to get to. Not upgrades, not luxury, just seats, real seats on real flights, booked fast, for people who had run out of time and money at the exact same moment, which is a specific and particular kind of cruelty I now understood intimately. I didn't announce it with a press release. I drove down to Henrietta on a quiet Sunday, sat by my mother's grave, which by then had a small, simple headstone with her name and the dates and nothing else, because that's what she would have wanted, no embellishment, and I told her about it, out loud, the way you talk to someone you're not sure can hear you, but need to talk to anyway. I told her that somebody, somewhere, chasing something, was going to make it home in time now, because of tomatoes and a porch and a woman who never once asked her daughter for anything, not even at the very end. I still run Meridian Sky. I still keep a lower public profile than most people in my position would, though I've stopped hiding it from the people actually in my life, which turns out to matter more than I understood for 11 years. I remarried nothing. Not yet. Not soon. Maybe not ever. And that's fine. That's a chapter I'm not in a hurry to write. What I did instead, in the years since that night at Gate C14, was rebuild something quieter and, I think, more honest, a life where the people who know me actually know me, all of me, the woman with the spreadsheets and the woman who cried in an airport lounge over a voicemail, the same person, finally, in every room she walks into. Every few months, I still get an update from the operations team about the Loretta Fund, a name, a destination, a reason. 2 weeks ago, it was a young man in Amarillo who needed to reach his grandmother in Michigan before she went into hospice. Last month, it was a nurse in Little Rock trying to get to her brother's funeral in Georgia with 11 hours notice and no money for a same-day fare. Every single time, I think of a tin of tomato seeds and a porch in Henrietta and a woman pointing at the sky, and I think, somebody's going somewhere. Somebody's chasing something. And this time, because of her, they're going to make it. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way through. If it moved you even a little, please hit like, subscribe if you're new here, drop a comment telling me what part hit you hardest, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll see you in the next one.